questions are actually, like a sequential, like from introduction to discussion section, but we will also have some general questions and also related to the abstract and conclusion. So the question is, how do you include global studies in your argument? And how do you difference between introduction and the literature review? Because sometimes there is some journals or some people also trying to put literature review within introduction. So how do you differentiate between that introduction and literature review?
Coming out of early researchers doing a master's and doing a PhD, where often the regulations state you need to have an introduction and a literature review. That often isn't the way in published literature, where they often work as one, where you would just write slightly differently, where you wouldn't need these distinct levels. So often we think like, oh, I must do these two distinct sections, but often they do superimpose. In terms of incorporate some global study in an argument, I mean, first of all, is to make sure that you need that argument. You need to make sure you need to case it in a global argument. It could be that your study is unique at a regional level, and perhaps the regional issues are particularly important. That the phenomena you're looking at is not necessarily global. So, first of all, check that you need to case it in a global rationale rather than just as a token. Then using something like the funnel, like the upside down triangle to set the picture, to give a broad, a brief and a broad review of what is happening at the global scale, whether that be in tackling poverty or pollution, so on and so on. And perhaps think about what is unique about your study. Why is it different to some of the challenges that are being identified at the global scale already? And what is common to those challenges, and what your paper may help contribute towards those common problems, again, if it is relevant at the global scale.
Okay, thanks. I think that's, I don't want to add anything. I think that's already capturing a lot of things. The third question, how do you define a concept or topic? Maybe that's the main concept or topic of your paper. How do you define? On what level of standard definition do you take? Where the definition should come from, or how do you define that topic or the concept?
No, I was going to say very similar. Very good point about authoritative sources. Also, perhaps where there are concepts which have multiple dimensions or multiple definitions, showing the reviewer that you do acknowledge these. Perhaps you have a critical discussion about these definitions, their applications, where have they been used, and so on. There'll be perhaps rare occasions where there will just be one single definition of a concept, but perhaps there will be more accepted definitions over others. So acknowledging that often concepts are multidimensional, but there are often more accepted concepts or definitions than others.
Yeah, I agree. I just would like to add one thing. Gregory was mentioning like different discipline of definition. For example, the resilience concept, coming from engineering or the natural science or the social science perspective. It's important to show the reviewer that the different debates, the academic debates, but it's also most important which which definition you are adopting or you are using in your research, and then why, and then how you have operationalized all through your research, because that's kind of also coming through that a concept or conceptual framework. So it's important to define, but it's also important to differentiate with the different disciplines and which one you are taking, and why. So I think that's important. Okay, so the question is there any rule of thumb that the 10% of the total paper should be an introduction, or there any ideal page limit for the introduction?
I mean, it's the first time I've heard of that rule of thumb. Doesn't mean that it isn't the rule of thumb, though. Um, Again, it all depends on what the word limits are, what your methods are, and so on. And you may start, your first draft with the introduction being 15%, and after multiple drafts, it may be down to 8%. By all means, if it will help you to write, then use a rule of thumb. And your supervisor or your co-authors will soon tell you, actually, Greg, you need to dedicate more here to the introduction. And it is very rare we'll do single authored papers, so there will always be that collaboration and interaction. By all means, if a rule of thumb helps, then by all means follow it. But
yeah, I think it's very difficult to answer this question because there is no rule of thumb of a golden rule that you can follow. It depends on the journal formatting style, the author's instruction. But it's also, I'm going back to Greg experience saying, share your paper with your co-authors or other colleagues. It doesn't necessarily sharing with other colleagues just to read that it has to be like a co-authorship, but it's often helpful that whether the background of the study, the uniqueness that you have written in your introduction, is it clear enough? So it's not about length, but how you are actually telling the world the background, the uniqueness, the importance of your study with a different definition of the concept and your research question. So someone asked a question while writing introduction, often ended up citing too many articles. Okay, so because they scared that if they don't cite too many articles, then it could fall under plagiarism. Is there any, again, thumb rule of what percentage of citation from other works are acceptable? Is there any tips to for this, like a fewer citation or too many citation?
I mean, as a early career researcher, you are very conscious of, giving credit for work where it's due and so on. And often I might find myself oversighting to begin with again in the first draft, and then realizing actually perhaps this isn't the most relevant citation. Perhaps I'm trying to over-reference and so on. And again, it's an iterative process, and you can go back through and realize where the key citations are, where they need to be in the paper. Also, if you feel that perhaps the balance is you have too many references, although I don't think you don't have to feel like that. It's different for different papers. Perhaps you may want to summarize various pieces of literature in your own paragraph at the end, which is much lighter in references, showing that you can draw the key lessons from the literature into more of a synthesis, into something coherent. But I mean, it's just something I guess I still contend with it now, but I guess it comes with more experience, and understanding where you need to reference and give the most relevant, quality over quantity, really.
Yeah, I mean, what I would like to add, because it reminds me a session that when I was doing my master's, I attended a session on publishing research articles, and there, it's not a rule of thumb, but I try to follow them personally. That when you are citing something, I always try to put the recent citation first. That means the informations that I'm putting is still valid. For example, if I'm saying the land degradation is around 40% and I'm citing 1990, I think that's something is not, how do you call it? It's reasonable. But it's also, I try to cite the journal article first. So Do not cite like a national label something or any reports or any web link. If you don't find any information or it's not published in the journal, then you can cite it. But I personally always cite the journal articles. And also I try to cite at least one or two, maybe the recent one and then maybe the old one, just to show that it's still valid. And also when I'm taking one information from one paper, then it doesn't it's not necessary I must need to cite two or three other papers, because I'm taking that information from that specific paper and I'm citing them, and then after rewriting, and that's actually covering that issue of plagiarism. So if I am citing, I'm giving the information from one paper, but then without reading other three and four papers, I'm just adding more citation. I think that's not reasonable. So it's always important to cite at least one or two, not more than that, because then it's actually making lengthy of your paper, and always the journal have the word limitation. If you are writing a paper, maybe it's your early stage of your career, and you try to focus the papers that you read during literature review, what it has published. Yeah. So I think you can choose those few journals, because that gives like a similar kind of a study, similar kind of methods has been used. If you have written some interdisciplinary paper and that you want to submit in highly technical journals, I think that's a very bad choice. So you have to know your work. Actually, you have to know yourself. Greg was mentioning it's a baby, it's your baby, or it's your product. You need to know why you need to sell your product. So it's sometimes you need to think. You have to sit back and think that what is the value of your work. For example, if it's like a highly innovative in terms of methodology that no one has used, or it's very innovative methods, has a global level implications, I would say target high. But if it's like generating knowledge using some repetitive methods, but the knowledge is still valuable for the global policies, I think you should go really quality journals without compromising your career. But there's also other people that want to compromise, but for different purposes. I don't want to mention that things because I have not compromised about in terms of the quality. The second important thing about the journal is, how do you respond to the reviewer comments? So you submit the paper. Usually it says 70 to 80% paper are rejected. Also, there's a higher rejection rate for the higher impact factor, the quality journals. So that means after submission, it's not the dream is become success. I know your dream is not fulfilled yet. Maybe it's a broken dream after a few months that the reviewer had a very negative comments or very positive comments. How do you respond, or how do you submit that revised version of your paper? What are the that strategy that you consider?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we've all had the experience of kind of getting comments back and reading them straight away, and feeling down after that first read. But I would just say, just let them settle as well for a day or so, and come back to the comments, and you start to then really engage with them and realize, this reviewer made a very valid point here, and actually perhaps the comments aren't as bad as they first seemed on the first read. Absolutely engage with them politely, respectfully. But actually I had just a very quick kind of anecdote from my experience. When I was responding to comments for our Nature Comms piece, I was perhaps being a bit too polite. Every single response I was saying, thank you very much, but so on and so on. And one of my co-authors said, come on, Greg, like, we're not writing a book here. We need to, be polite, but also to the point, and remembering that editors, they're pressed for time and so on. So there is a balance to strike, and obviously, again, the more experience you gain, the easier that balance becomes. Again, also just finally, perhaps the instinct is to try and refute or argue, with everything, and as Sylvia said, you should engage with every point in it. Is more than likely you can make the changes without sacrificing too much. And again, if it's kind of a conditional acceptance on the condition that you make these changes, then as long as you're not sacrificing the key story of your paper and so on, then it's likely that it's a good thing to go ahead and make the changes that are suggested.
Yeah, I mean, before I add my comments, I have very specific comments about, for example, let's say the author, the team of the authors are really, really, really polite. But there's also, you get some comments from, like, if the review, there was a 2 or 3 reviewers, there is at least, usually in my experience, one review is very how do you call it's so very critical, very difficult comments, very challenging comments. Yeah, so there's some comments that very constructive. Okay, I agree, very polite, thank you very much. I also try to thank. Sometimes I get comments, okay, why you are thanking so much, but I think it's a voluntary work, they're giving a time, so I really prefer to thank them. But what about the very hard and challenging question? Maybe it's beyond the scope of the paper, or something out of the world, or very, very hard. That, how do you defend that very hard comments? We have to polite, but also personally take, right. Okay, I try to read the comments at least 4 or 5 times before I start to respond them, because what happens with me, when I read first time, I say, wow, that's all sounds very challenging comments and hard, maybe not, may not be constructive, but then when I read second times, third times, fourth times, I say, they're right. It's very we should be consider all those comments, because what happens is actually, from my PhD supervisor team, thanks to them, because what I learned from these, sometimes it's in my mind or in our mind. So I'm working on this topic. I know why I have used that method, why the results is varying, what is the importance of this work. But it's not there. I have not written them. I have not clarified. I have not linked that 2 sentences or the paragraph to each other. So it has to be there. So what I do, I usually sit back and try to read my papers after 1 or 2 weeks. Maybe try to divert my mind to someone else. Maybe a week holiday or week, working on something else. So then after reading that comments, I find really constructive. So I would say read those comments before you start working on this reviewer comments. In addition to politeness, don't get angry, because even if you are going to eat a plate of rice or pasta, and if you ask your family members, they prefer to choose different ingredients, right? But then what about the paper? Because that's an academic and policy importance, or the influence. It's about science. So different people have a different perspective, and you have to respect those perspectives, and that's why it's a science. And you have to value those comments, because trust me, that always improve your paper. But sometimes there is a very, very hard and challenging question. I agree that you always think and then try to add literature. Like, for example, recently, within some of my publications, there was a reviewer. They're completely rejecting, saying this method does not make any sense, blah blah things. But then I come back with saying I added more information about the method, added more information about the usefulness of the method, how it has been used in previous papers, previous literatures, how it has been evolved, and what is the importance of these methods. And the same reviewer, they agree, say, that sounds really interesting. So, sometimes if I'm saying I have used these methods for this reason and this is how, it's not always enough. So that's why it's important to send to your other colleagues that you can share it and get comments on there from them. Also, finally, when you are submitting, I submit the revised version. I always make a clean version and the track changes version. And what I'm now doing is within that track changes version, I also copy the reviewer comments to show them actually why I have incorporated their comments. So the comments and the track changes version, because I know all the reviewers are very busy, and I know this, maybe most of them or maybe all of them are the volunteering to science. So trying to try to help them that within a very short time they can make a very comprehensive overview of your work, how you have revised. Should research limitations be part of methodology section or discussion or conclusion? What do you think?
Sure. I mean, again, there is probably no hard or fast rule, but what I would suggest is you don't want to give the limitations of your study before you explain and give the results. So the way it's normally done is that you discuss the limitations of your study with respect to your research questions and also the wider literature. So to perhaps give them in the methodology would then perhaps undermine your results, which are yet to be read. Saying that, if there are some very well-known limitations to your methods, then perhaps you may want to talk about them in the method section with perhaps the ways you have tried to work to overcome some of those limitations. But the more general discussion about their implications for how to interpret your results and the implications for policymakers and decision makers, I would suggest to keep them in the discussion. And perhaps you could have a 1 or 2 line part in the conclusion as well, although the conclusion should really be the main takeaways from the paper, and the main takeaways are unlikely to be the uncertainties and the limitations. So really, for me, and probably the majority of papers, the real home for those are in the discussion for me.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. What I would like to add, because I think when I see or I have in terms of my experience, when I'm writing a modeling paper, the limitations of my model is always I try to put in the method section, because I think that's more or less like a common practice of the models. But then the overall limitation of that particular research in that research field, I try to always put in the discussion. But having said that, the discussion, the limitation has to be very specific, and always it is important how you try to overcome those limitations. And also, you need to give an impression maybe that having those limitations, how you research is still useful. Because if you are just saying the limitations maybe broadhead, then it's always, it may risking your paper. So that's a bit tricky. Because why I'm saying tricky, because all through the paper, if you remove the references, the figures, maybe all through the papers maybe 6,000 or 7,000 words maximum. It's not that much. So you need to think and think before you write. So what I do, okay, I'm writing the discussion section, I'm writing that policy implication part maybe within 1 or 2 days, and then another day another 1 or day 2 I'm thinking about my limitation, and then I'm investing another day for writing that small 6 7 lines about limitation, the overcoming those limitations. So it's really get very specific, and also important for the meaningful for your research. The second question is a methodological flow diagram mandatory? Why and why not?
I mean, I think the answer here is no. For me anyway, the methodological flow diagram is not mandatory.
Yeah.
Of course, there may be some very well-defined methodologies which you simply wouldn't be able to put into some form of flow diagram. Of course, the main, as you probably all know, the main aim of the methods is to communicate what, as Sarwar said, what you've done, why you've done it, and how you have done what you have done. If a flow diagram will help organize that section, help the reviewer to understand what exactly you did and when you did it and so on, then of course that is perfectly reasonable to use a flow diagram. Also, it may help you to save words as well, rather than trying to be perhaps rather than a flow diagram, it could be the structure or an outline of a model or modules in a survey and so on. And rather than having to go through those line by line, you could provide a diagram to summarize that. But on the flip side, some journals may equate figures to words. So if you have a half-page figure, that is equivalent to 250 words. So eventually it becomes a bit of a balance. But I don't know what you feel, Sawar, but I would say no. A flow diagram is not mandatory, but it may be useful in certain circumstances.
Yeah, I mean, just would like to add one thing is, I always utilize the supplementary information, because the methods, what you mentioned in your story, that the method is like the abstract of your methods. And then I explain the details, methodology, even more details about the specific methods and where, in which field it has already been applied. So give a more level, increase the chance of acceptance level, that the robust methodology. So I try to utilize the supplementary information. From my recent few experience of the paper, like when it's a lot of things going within your methods, like you have used different type of methods like questionnaire, focus group discussion, remote sensing, or any other topics, then I feel it is important sometimes to give the methodological flow diagram, because then the reviewer can see why and how it is addressing which research questions, and which method has been used for what type of research question. But then necessarily it may not be in the main manuscript, but maybe in the supplementary information. But if you're using like 1 or 2 methods that's simple, kind of flowing your story, then it's not necessary. So it's depend what types of paper or the research you are working on. But it's not definitely not mandatory, but it's helpful.
Yeah.
But would you like to add something, that empirical research, it is always important to include theories or conceptual framework?
I mean, again, I think the answer here is that it is not always important. You should clearly define the research area, the problem, your aims, and so on. The comment here mentions that the reviewer suggested that they should write about a particular theoretical framework. Part of publishing is sometimes getting a bit lucky, and perhaps a different reviewer would have suggested a different theoretical framework, or not have made explicit the need to have a theoretical framework at all. So of course you should always base your papers in theory, the concepts that have already been accepted and published, but whether you need to have a dedicated section titled theoretical framework, or there is a difference there. And saying that, if the paper has come back from the reviewer and it is, say, a conditional acceptance on the condition that you write more explicitly about a theoretical framework, then I would suggest that you do that, and it may just be a slight shaping of your current introduction and literature review to fit that. You may have to go away and do a bit more reading around the subject. But again, there is no real hard or fast rule about whether you need to explicitly say that. It's done on discipline and who you may get as a reviewer and so on.
Well, personally, I always when I'm reading the background of the research, and then I choose, okay, I'm going to do this work. The first thing I do is I develop the research question or the formulate the research question, and then I try to select some of the conceptual framework. But for me, the theoretical framework is always like, for example, if I'm using the DIPSA, if I'm using the Ostrom social ecological framework, or if I'm using the livelihood framework, so any kind of framework, actually, that really helps to structure my all through the paper. So it's not only conceptually soundness, but it's also helpful for yourself. Like you can actually restructure, helpful for restructuring your results section or maybe the discussion section. That also for the method section. So I think if you have or if you can, it's important because that also kind of robustness of your whole research. But it's not always important because maybe in different field that there is no conceptual framework or like if I'm using like climate change trends or the temperature trends. Anyway, so that's the thing. The next question is how you explain the selection of the study area. What should be there?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And in reality, so for example, my PhD, I had to choose. The funding constraints made it clear that I had to choose one of 3 study areas. But of course, you can't write that in your in your paper as much as you might like to. Really, it's in thinking about what is relevant, what information will communicate, or you need to include in this section, which relates to your research questions and the motivation of writing the paper. And of course, when you perhaps will start writing this section, the tendency, or the feeling is to get as much detail in there as possible. Talking about demographic data and climate trends and so on and so on. Really, I would just suggest, and you can always start by writing that, and you would then come back and revise and refine. And again, as kind of keeps coming up, look at what has been published already in those journals. And often their surprising introduction to the case study is surprisingly quite short. And often you can then add furnishing details in the methodology or at the end of the literature review and so on. I mean, I personally, I always just start writing as much as I can, which remains relevant, and come back to it and realize actually this part here about demographic trends or whatever it is not as relevant as I initially thought it was to my research questions. And there's almost always a pressure with word count anyway. That's another reality of publishing. It's not a PhD thesis where you may have 80,000 words. So but how about yourself, Sarwar?
Well, I mean, I understand that what he was saying about that not maybe too much information about demographics or the general information, because when I see some of the papers that people try to explain too many things about ecology or social things, yeah, it's important to give an overview, but I try to keep it very short, like 3-4 lines, and that's it. But what I try to focus is, why I have selected that area. For example, if I'm working on the focus is on agriculture, I should explain how the area is important in terms of agriculture. What is the percentage of the people focused on agriculture? What is the percentage? how it's dependent, the livelihood dependent, how the socio-ecology dependent. So the both ecological perspective and social perspective is focused on agriculture. So if you're writing a paper on agriculture, and then you are putting information on agriculture and fisheries and forest people, I think that doesn't make any sense. So that's the selection of the study. So why you have choose that area to focus on agriculture, maybe land degradation. So you need to justify that area. You need to put that information. Okay, this area particularly maybe drought vulnerable, climate vulnerable, how it is vulnerable. So in terms of also like deforestation, you need to justify the selection of the study area. But also I also had a different experience that he was mentioning, that about the project, that the funding limitations that we are working on that project. So I particularly get advice, okay, if you are working on a project and that's also the part of your motivation, you should state it. And I did it, but it may not be necessary, but sometimes may be important. But also you also need to know literature. For example, if you're focusing at a regional scale agriculture deforestation, it is always important to justify why we need to know the regional scale deforestation or agricultural production. You can always relate to the global policies, the national policies. So that's the justification part of your study area. So you need to know the literature well, and you need to write a very small section but very meaningful, that people can understand why this. For example, if you're working on a mangrove forest in some part of the world, you need to justify how important the mangrove in that area, right? You don't need to justify the poverty of that region. Maybe the poverty and mangrove linked, but not maybe the other things that is not important or focus for your study. Okay, the next one. I think we have addressed this about, like, describe all the information of data collections, laboratory work, survey methods, because sometimes the people also get comments, they get more comments, they want more from the reviewers. I
Mm-hmm.
think that flow diagram things and conceptual framework, supplementary information already addressed this question.
Mm-hmm.
The next one is like, same question we have already had. There's the If you're using the well-known statistical methods, is
Mm-hmm.
it important to explain in details?
I mean, to be honest, I haven't used that many statistical methods in the papers that I
No,
have
just think
done,
about
but
any commonly methods. Like for example, if you're using system
yeah,
dynamics model, A
sure,
method or B method, that's well established,
sure.
ample literatures. But is important to explain in your paper?
Yeah, a couple of things. First, of perhaps would be depends on where you are publishing. So if you are publishing a modeling paper, systems dynamics modeling paper, and you're aiming to publish it in systems dynamics review, one of the main technical specialist systems dynamics journals, then you probably do not need to dedicate as much space, if any space, describing the history of systems dynamics or some of the fundamental assumptions and however, if you're going to a more general article where there will be non-specialist audience in this area, then you should at least, the very minimum, give reference to some of the classic studies which have developed and progressed this, your methodology, your particular technique, kind of over time. And what I would say is perhaps focus on what you are doing in your paper, which is, advances that, or is different to what has been done in the past, making it clear that you are using these techniques in a new region, or under a new sub methodology and so on. Again, it's a really difficult balance to strike, but you need to show that you are aware of what has been done before with this methodology, partly for the reviewers, partly for the readers to be able to go away and follow their interests if they're just getting into the field, for example. Give an idea of the diversity of where the diverse areas technique has been used. But by all means, it's unlikely you'll need to give, a page of describing the history of your particular methodology.
Yeah, I think it is, I agree that if it's like a highly technical journal, so it depends on the target journal and your target audience.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes maybe the equations are important to put in your main paper,
Mm-hmm.
but if it's not a highly technical journal or you are targeting technical audience, then you always can you can use that supplementary information, because that's coming to the next question linking to the reproducibility of research. So what I see is that even, I mean, beyond the issue of the journals and audience, like I try to put the detailed methodology, including methodological flow diagram, including the equations, and in details where these methods has been used, and all the equations from like my modeling work or any statistical methods, more detailed information. So like why I have used like some nonlinear regression in terms of time series data in supplementary information, because that then when some people that wants to work on similar topic, they can really use your methods, because I agree your method section is almost like abstract of your methods. So if someone wants to understand how you have used your this particular method, is always very challenging. So if you want to increase the reproducibility, I always prefer recommend to use the supplementary information. And then the method section should be write in an easy way, what, why, and how. So what you have used and why you have used, linking your research questions, and then how you have used. Do you want to add anything about this reproducibility?
I mean, not really. It's something that I also need to get better at. We probably all need to get better at. There are endeavors out there by the journals. I'm trying to think of, they've started, being able like to publish your data, and you can fill in, checklists. I'm trying to think of the exact name of what they do. It's like called like open data or something, and it is, it's a particular checklist to make your data as reproducible as possible. Fill out the metadata, where it's come from, how it was collected, your sampling frame, and so on. So standardizing metadata and the search terms and so on. But it's certainly something that I need to get better at. For my first paper, we made the model which I built available to the reviewers and also available on request at the point of publication. So that is quite a transparent way of sharing your methods and inviting people to comment and provide feedback. Of course, there could be certain scenarios where you're unable to share data, whether it's around privacy or ethical considerations or due to your funders. But really, it's certainly something that is really accelerating, and I'm sure you know too, Sarwar. Probably in about 10 years' time, major focus will be on, well, probably not even in 10 years' time, 5 years' time or so. Reproducibility will be really at the forefront of everything we do. It's come a long way since even, say, the 1990s or early 2000s. So it's certainly a hot topic, and certainly something I need to think more about.
I think it's not wise to hide something. It's always to show up and making it open access that everybody can understand. Because if you are publishing something and then someone cannot understand and someone cannot use for their own work, or maybe the policymaker, they cannot understand your paper, what do you mean by this, all these informations, then I think as academics is my waste of time, because maybe it's good for my promotions or something else. But what about when we're going to teach students? You also need to think about this, easy readable information. Why you draw the line of your results? Because some people try to write the results and discussion together, and some people think, okay, it's numbers and statistics, and then how you actually, because you analyze the data, maybe how long, maybe 1 year or 2 years, you have worked on that project and you have generated huge data sets. And then when you are writing a paper, maybe you have to gather or summarize from 15, 20 graphs. How do you do that? How do you overcome that challenges? Because that linked with drawing the line, word limitations, because all these questions are related to that. How do you interpret your non-significant results?
Mm. Yeah, absolutely. They're very good questions. I think in terms of, say, the number of graphs and where do you draw the line and so on, sometimes it might feel natural if you manage to get the kind of the top half of your paper quite tight and quite concise, and you're able to define your research questions, concisely, and find the kind of gap in the literature for your work. It, at least in my experience, and it'll be the same for everyone, but then the number and the different types of results you may want to present starts to fall into place. And actually, there may be time series, or there may be statistical outputs which don't fit that kind of core narrative. And actually, my current supervisor, Professor Bhavani Shankar at the University of Sheffield, he's always telling me, Greg, you need to think of one or two key messages for this paper, and everything you do needs to orbit around those messages. Um, and I don't think there really is some journals may specify, you have a limit on figures, you have a limit on figures and tables. I don't really think there's a rule of thumb necessarily, but you'll get a feel that actually an extra table, an extra figure won't help to communicate anything extra towards your research questions. And then you have shown your headline outcome, you have been able to, explain its causes or, its associations and so on. And due to limitations in the word count and page count, that it's not a PhD thesis, or you have to then draw a line. Again, also, I mean, just in my experience, this is an iterative process where perhaps at first draft you try too much, and one of your colleagues will come back and say, can you collapse these two figures into one? Do you really need this time series? Is it relevant to our research questions? For me, it is really just giving it a go, getting it out there to your colleagues and your co-authors, and letting them guide you, and start that debate about where we need to draw the line here.
Yeah, I mean, that's very good information. For drawing the line, I would like to refer again to or recommend, formulating research questions at the very beginning, because when you are writing the results section, because that is a lot of numbers, but then tables, and it is not linked with any kind of um, environmental shocks, but it is economic shocks, because it's a cross-sectional data, because it's not a time series data. So maybe that specific year there was no like a drought, so it's the shocks, the economic shocks, it's not linked with the shocks, maybe only with economic shocks, not with environmental shocks. So you need to link with research question, because that always helpful for answering in the results section, and that gives me drawing that line when I'm answering each of those. For example, if If it's not something relevant, that information, then I just simply skip it. So because it's very small section, you have to write altogether 6,000, 7,000 words. Okay, so the next section is about discussion. We have already talked, three of us, about the discussion. How do you write, and how do you think? And one question that I would like to mention that we have not addressed is how do you provide link your results to the policy implications? You know, how do you imply for the real world policies, so real world like a policy problems? How do you overcome that challenge?
Perhaps you would like to start this one, Sarwar, because I think you have a bit more experience here, and perhaps I can come off
Yeah,
of your come
yeah.
off
I
of your
mean,
thought.
what I do is, when I try to, after writing the results, I usually sit back and think about the usefulness of my work. If I'm working on wetlands, and then I'm trying to follow some of the global and national policies, that how that recovery, the wetlands recovery or the degradation is violating or meeting those national targets, and is the existing targets or the existing policy is enough to restore those degradations.
Mm,
They're similar to other, maybe like a poverty reduction. So I try to compare with the national policies, like in Bangladesh or Vietnam or Kenya when I'm working, and I try to read their main national policies,
mm,
and also the global policies like sustainable development goals or any other policies, maybe some even dialogue, the discussion like SDGs or the MDGs. So I mean, we need to reduce the regional heterogeneity, inequality. So try to link all those policies in this way. So you need to link your findings with the real world policies. Also in terms of climate change adaptation. So if I'm talking about adaptation factors, we cannot always focus on the national level policies, the national level adaptation plan, or the Paris agreements, or any other relevant policies. That what we can learn from that findings. Maybe, for example, I'm just giving an example. It's not a particular study. For example, if the adaptation highly dependent on the remittance or the migration, then is the national policies or the SDGs, even because all this work somehow linked now together each other, taking into comprehensive view, is all these variables are included, and what we can learn. So what happens is people try to, even it was with me at the beginning of my writing paper, that to write a lot of things. But then it realized it's not a lot of things. It's few important things that should be very concrete, but should be, in terms of ground reality and in terms of the policy process in national and global policies. And this is how I try to, but still I'm learning that how to, write policy implication, because I agree that's the most challenging part in my sense. But
there may also
yeah.
be opportunities. It is a slightly different, but also writing of policy briefs, policy communications. They are different to research papers and outputs, but where a particular piece of research may have particular policy implications for a particular region or nation or wherever it may be, there is also that pathway as well, which I don't necessarily have any experience in that, but it is a pathway to potentially utilize if the research paper avenue is not the right way, like best way to do that.
Yeah,
So,
what I would like to add is, we often write very vague or general policy implications.
mm,
If I'm being asked by a reviewer that, okay, what about your policy implication of findings? we often write a very general recommendation. We need to avoid that because it's a scientific paper. It must has to be based on your findings. So I usually try to put the findings first and then back up with the policies, either it's a national or the global scale. So this is how. So it should be always linked with your findings. Your findings is main. So if you are find a like poverty, or the modeling says there will be 2 degree increase in temperature, and then you are suddenly saying we need to store carbon in that region, doesn't, for me, doesn't make any sense. The policy recommendation, the implication must has to be linked with your findings of 2 degrees Celsius temperature increase. So this is how I see the discussion. Do you want to add anything, Greg?
No, I think that summarizes it nicely, and it's something that I'm having to do currently, and it's
Yeah.
something we actively think about all the time. So it is
Okay,
an
I mean,
ongoing.
I think we already discussed how we write the discussion section three of us. So maybe we would like to recommend you go back to that section, because we are answering a lot of questions, like 50, 60 questions. So we need to make it short. Um, One of the questions is, how do you differentiate between abstract and conclusion?
Sure. Well, for me, the abstract is a summary of the paper, including its context, its importance within the wider literature and policy environment, your methodology, and also then some of the key headline takeaways. Often journals will specify how they would like their abstract written, and that is a template to follow, and to be, to follow almost to the letter. Conclusion for me then really brings, you can always summarize the methods you have used, but really focuses on the outputs and the lessons you have learned from your paper. So it will be less about perhaps the importance or some of the key literature, and really on the key takeaway messages. Of course,
Exactly.
there are some commonalities between them, but the conclusion should really be like the key takeaways from your results. Perhaps some of the very small, some of a very brief outline of some of the constraints faced and so on. Whilst the abstract really is more the whole manuscript, a summary of that.
Yeah, I agree, because I think in summary the conclusion is the take home message. So what you would like to give a take home message for the readers. So it's more like maybe I'm not exactly 100% right, but maybe you can like a summary of your results and discussion section. But what I see, the abstract is the summary of your whole paper, the motivation, the methods, the findings, and your one or two important for in terms of the discussion. Um, do you think is it really necessary, just going back, future research and recommendation be stated in the conclusion?
Again, it's probably not necessary. I think a common theme is that very little is necessary. It depends on the author and the context and the results and so on. It may be that a reviewer would ask why you didn't do a certain methodology, or present a certain set of data, interpret the results in a certain light, and you may wish to preempt those questions by discussing what you could do in future with advances in the methods, with the data available, and so on. So of course you can always discuss those. It is also interesting to present these potential research questions and directions, being able to link back to the gaps you have identified at the start of the paper. But I certainly wouldn't say it was necessary, particularly in the conclusion. Maybe something for the discussion, for example. How about yourself, Sarwar?
Um, For me, I think what I would like to recall again, that I was mentioning the summary of the results and the
Mm,
discussion I would put in the conclusion section. But in terms of the future research and recommendation, I would put at the end of the discussion,
mm,
especially when I write the limitation and how I overcome those limitation. I always give an with a link with that limitations. What should be the feature in feature research? Like if I'm saying that my model does not account that spatial heterogeneity, but then the feature work could lead for the spatial heterogeneity, because that's a valid limitation of my paper. But also, like if I'm analyzing the different dimensions of poverty or the food security, because in the food security there is a different dimension. So if I'm not analyzing one dimension, maybe because of the data set is not available, yeah, and we need to draw a line. So you need to tell that limitation, and then it linked with the feature research, because that's why I prefer to write the feature research in discussion section, because that's somehow linked with your limitation. And then definitely some of the recommendation, because recommendation is always linked with your policy implication, which we were discussing before. I think there is a very two technical questions is coming in the general section, because now we have finished all that five different sections and moving towards some general questions. Like this question is for you: which tends to use past, present, or continuous mainly in the results section? I think as a native speaker, it's your turn.
sure. It's something that John Deering always used to pull me up on, because I would always
Mm-hmm.
write in past tense, to begin with, saying that my results showed this, showed this and that. But then he would rightly say, "Well, do your results no longer show this finding?" So for me, the methodology, where you have done things in the past, you've collected data, you write it in the past, you would write your result sections in the present. So this model scenario shows that, rather than showed that, for example. Um, then again, there are some complexities around that. So you would perhaps, if you were introducing the structure of the paper, trying to think of an example, you would say the flow of this paper will be. You could perhaps use the future tense there, but yeah, in general, I'd say the methods would go in past. That would be acceptable there, and then the results would be in the present tense, because you are presenting your results to the reader, to the reviewer. They remain valid at that point. Hopefully, you've shown they're valid through different tests and robustness and so on. And I think that's how I believe how papers are written in general.
Yeah, I think it's more or less like a common format, but people also try to do different format. But I think it's a very
Mm.
standard format that you have said. So the another question is, if you have a master's thesis, yeah, I think it's could be also like a PhD thesis, a master thesis. I mean, a book chapter or a journal article. What do you choose, and how do you choose?
Yeah, I mean, I don't have a master's thesis, so I can't really talk about it. But I did have a PhD thesis, and I mean, it's not a decision you have to really make by yourself. I mean, if you have a strong opinion for your career or your personal preference, then you may want to make that decision by yourself. But I'd always just say, you will hopefully you'll have the support of your supervisor, and they will be able to give you advice. It could be that a book chapter may be most suitable if there's a particular book that is being written at the time, and you're able to collaborate on that and place your chapter in that book. In general, articles tend to be more widely done, because you have review process and so on. So also, it's probably because the majority of the reading you will do will be from journal articles. And the majority of the literature you cite will be from journal articles. So it may seem like a more natural home for your chapter from your thesis or dissertation. But again, there is no right or wrong answer. It's up to the
Exactly.
person.
No, I mean it depends on the context, on the place, and because for example, if you are working, you want to be in academia, it's always the journal articles are preferable. But now these days, the book chapters are often peer reviewed. Yeah, so it's
Of course.
always written. But also in some countries or some places, the book chapters, the book are given a priority. Yeah, journals, articles somewhere given more priority. So it depends where you are, in which field you are working, and where you are there. One thing, I maybe I'm wrong, but the journal articles, especially the high quality, when you were targeting like quality journals, the journal articles are written very comprehensively, and also the research is more like a comprehensive. But that doesn't necessarily mean that book chapters are not, written in a comprehensive way, because the book chapters are often read by the students. So often you get a more information. So sometimes the writing style is completely different. Yeah. So this is the main difference, that how you want to write your paper. Is it more like in a book chapter format, or you want to write in a more journal article format? Because this is one of the distinction between these two, because book chapters, the books are always, most of the time, like for the students, for undergrad, masters. So it has to be very easily readable, with a lot of informations, with a lot of literatures. um, um, I think I think the question is, both of us, from a native speaker and a not native speaking perspective, is like, how do you write, improve your scientific writing as a non-native English speaker, especially difficult to express the ideas within the word limits, and writing and formatting that sentences. How do you want to respond them as a native speaker?
Uh, well, I can only well, obviously, native speakers also, I guess, face different problems to this, around word count and so on. I mean, I've certainly been involved with colleagues, who I met through doing my PhD fieldwork in Orissa in India, and I've read and since been added to their author lists on a couple of their papers where they have sent them to me, and I've gone through and been kind of the grammar and the grammatical editor. So I would always suggest reaching out to someone, to even just focus on the grammar. I mean, I can't really speak from experience about not being a non-native speaker. Um, Perhaps you wanted to take over there, Sarwar, by
Yeah, I mean, I think 2 points is, one is, as a non-native speaker, when I see myself and also some of my colleagues with talking, I mean, working with them or talking about these challenges, is people try to always formulate a complex sentence. And especially, I think it's a very new trend, but always been like, in journal article, you try to write in a very easy and easy readable way. So sometimes, at least to some extent, it's not about native or non-native speaker. Yeah, because that basic grammar, you all have the knowledge. The difference between a native and non-native speaker is about the few things, that the grammar. I agree with you that it's always better to send someone who have not worked on your paper. Yeah, because I have seen that many native speakers, they send for proofreading to colleagues or either any professional people, And even when there is a native speaker in the paper, that also you get a comments that you need to go for proofreading. Yeah, so it's not about native and non-native speaker, at some extent, because as a non-native speaker we always try to formulate very complicated sentence, and sometimes at the end it doesn't make any sense. So I always try to formulate simple sentence and avoid complex sentence. And I read my manuscript before I submit to the to this journal. But I also definitely um, send some of my very nice colleagues. They would like to go through not only comments, including you, but also maybe some grammar check, or there may be typos, because I also receive from other colleagues, because that's how you exchange and share your with your colleagues. So I always highly recommend that exchange your papers with other colleagues who have not worked and have write or edited that paper before you finalize that one. So because it's always helpful, because something in your mind is there, but it's not there. So if someone from third party or third person is reading your manuscript, they can figure out that typos, they can figure out that grammar, they can figure out, okay, that sentence doesn't make any sense. So it's always very helpful. So share with your colleagues.
And you can always acknowledge that person
Yeah.
for their time, in the acknowledgements thing. So by all means, perhaps just an hour or so of their time. So
yeah, that's important.
By all means.
I think that's also answering about the complex sentence.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a very important is, and after getting comments from the reviewer, sometimes they ask for doing the reanalyzing things or edit or the discussion part. People think sometimes it's frustrating.
Yes, and I can completely understand those frustrations. You've worked on something for months or potentially years, and eventually it gets a review and a reviewer disagrees. I mean, in the absolute worst case, where if you feel it is not worth making those changes, you can always take your paper out of. You can unsubmit. You can look to go elsewhere. So it's really just weighing up, whilst being as keeping integrity and transparency and so on, weighing up the benefit of addressing the reviewer's comment, particularly if it is a significant change, versus saying, okay, perhaps we need to look elsewhere. Perhaps a different reviewer would see this differently. If you decide that this change in analysis is possible within the time frame you have available in your work schedule, the co-authors agree, then unfortunately it's something that we just have to do, and whether that is as a kind of supplementary analysis, kind of a showing the robustness of your keeping the main or the methods you have already used, but providing a supplementary analysis, perhaps in the supplementary information in the appendix. Perhaps that is one way. It's unlikely that you will have to rewrite the whole of your results, the whole of your analysis as a conditional acceptance. It's likely that if a reviewer feels that is needed, you will be rejected, and then you have the opportunity to submit the same paper but elsewhere. With minor corrections, if you like, if you don't want to do that analysis again. So as always, it's weighing up. Is it worth making these changes? Can I justify making these changes? Can I justify keeping it the same? Of course, it's a frustration, but sometimes we need to pick our battles, and if that is what is needed to be published in this journal when it's the right place for publication and it's great for your career and so on, perhaps we need to just we do need to just do this analysis. And
yeah, well, I would like to share one of my experience that I don't want to specify that paper, but there was a paper that I really love it, and I think it's a very important and very significant contribution. But when I receive the comments there was like one or two reviewers. There was, very challenging comments. The questions were really challenging, and sometimes I'm so, wow, I mean, it doesn't make any sense. But then I was thinking, and then I found, okay, that makes sense, but that's not durable. That's not possible to do it. And then when I started trying to do that, I did it. And after completing that, that specific analysis, and after finalizing the paper, I thought, wow, I think that was a very good learnings for me in terms of not writing the paper, but something new methods, but also increased the acceptability or the standard of my paper. It really improved those comments. That was like four or five comments were really challenging. But then there was also some comments from in another paper, and the comments were really frustrating because the comments were going out of the box. Yeah. But then I took those comments, which are really constructive, and I think that makes sense to improve my paper, and I submit to the next journal. And believe me, and I've received very few comments, like one minor revisions and one some major revisions. But the question, because I think, because that I already addressed some of the critiques, the comments from the previous two reviewers, and that's really improved the paper. So it's all about, you can make a team which who can actually maybe like a friend who think about you, and you review each other's paper, and you give comments, because we need to share our knowledge. We need help, we need support. It's not about like, a paper, but this is how the whole world is we the progressing. So it's also about your paper, so it's not getting frustrated, as the example of the pasta or the rice, anything else. So you think and you write a paper. It really takes a long time to write a journal, a very good article. And sometimes, if the paper is not cited, if not the paper influence the policy or any other thing, then it's not useful, or you're not making a good work. So you really spend more time to make a quality papers. So I think that's the end of our discussion, because we try to answer like almost like a 45 to 50 questions. And in addition to our discussion, I think maybe the people will find it useful. And after posting it online, if we have more questions, like different questions that we have not addressed, please let us know, because you can comment in the box. You can send us an email, because there will be email address, so the profiling of each of us.
Mm-hmm.
So if you find this discussion useful, please share and use for your work. Thank you very much. Thanks, Greg,
Okay.
again.
Thank you.